All right, so let's formally start this. So, what are you drinking over there?
We got some Union Forge Pennsylvania vodka here at
Breakfast vodka.
Union Forge, not just for nighttime drinking anymore.
If you had tomato juice, you could totally.
Yeah, I could make some Bloody Marys out of this. Pretty good. It's really good. It's smooth, and James and I are starting our podcast with this. So, cheers, James.
Thank you, Fred.
You're
You as well,
welcome.
sir.
Thank you, Eric.
Boy.
Thank you.
No
Union
worries.
Forge vodka, Pennsylvania made, right here in Pennsylvania.
Well, how about
And we're
it?
off to the races.
All right, so what are we talking about today, pal?
Well, we are going to talk Atlantis, but I'm actually lucky to be here today. It was a hazardous drive-in to Coriopolis. I didn't tell anybody, but when I was driving through Murraysville last night, where it's 4 lanes all built up, a doe runs right in front of me, right through the middle of Murraysville. So I almost hit that, and then that wasn't even the craziest encounter. I get through the Squirrel Hill tunnels, and then there's a traffic backup. I was like, there's never traffic after Squirrel Hill on 22. And I look out ahead, and there is this PennDOT plow truck just parked there right in the left-hand lane of the highway with its yellow light on. And so, like, everybody's, like, merging, getting around. And as I'm driving by, I look, there was a huge stainless steel grill, like a Weber, just sitting right there on the road. And so he's blocking people from hitting the Weber grill. But then the triply crazy part is Pitt played away yesterday, and I shouldn't have worn this because they got rolled by Louisville.
They did.
It was terrible.
They
but
did.
I'm thinking to myself, there wasn't a tailgating event in Pittsburgh, and even if there was, initially I thought this thing had to have fallen off somebody's truck. But if it fell off somebody's truck, it would have rolled and got to. It was seriously sitting there in the left lane,
Like perfectly upright.
pristine condition. Like if I had
It
a
sounds
truck,
like a college prank.
I could have pulled over and just
Doesn't
like
it?
loaded the thing onto my truck.
Oh my
So,
God.
want to let you know, I looked at the fine print for the Eric McKenna project, and once you hit episode 10, you're entitled to a one-day insurance rider to actually get the guests there on time. So next time I'm gonna have to claim that one.
We're well insured.
He flies me in. He flies me in.
How could I do continual shows with him and not be insured?
Good point. Good point.
So we're looking to talk about Atlantis today, and I'm pretty excited because I sort of assumed that we did this one already, but we have confirmed we have not done this one. So I'm pumped because I have read, and there's no confirmation in this, but allegedly there are more books written about Atlantis than any other single topic. So it is collectively embedded in the human psyche. So I thought we could talk about it today. And what's kind of cool, because full disclosure, for years and years, I never really bought into Atlantis. But what's very fascinating to me is it dovetails into so many other stories of ancient mythology and lore. So even for viewers or listeners at home, I think even if you're not initially into Atlantis, stick around and give this one a shot because I think that you'll really, really like it. So part of the reason that for years I wasn't totally into it is the actual point source material of Atlantis mostly just comes from one place, and that's the philosopher Plato. Now, I'm going to say a caveat with that. I say mostly because one of the fascinating coincidences out there is the amount of former civilizations, former cities, ancient cities, languages that dot the eastern coast of the Atlantic Ocean and the western coast of the Atlantic Ocean that all start with AT, like the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlas Mountains. There are so many cultures, even spanning different language barriers, like the Mayas, the Aztecs. They all have names that do relate to Atlantis. But in terms of like what do we physically have, that comes from Plato. So probably a lot of people know the ballpark. So in 2 of his works, which we'll talk about, he said that Atlantis was a naval power. And the geographic information, the only tidbit he gives us is it lies across from the Pillars of Hercules. Where are they at? We'll talk about that. And he said that Atlantis was so powerful, it conquered many parts of Western Europe and Africa, but then they try to invade Athens. The Athenians repel it. It angers the gods. So according to Plato, Atlantis sinks into the ocean in a quote-unquote single day and night of misfortune. Now, the one thing we know...
That's some serious misfortune.
It's major.
I know, right?
Angered the wrong gods.
Hey, wait. I know you're probably going
No,
to
please.
touch on this, but can you give us just so I know for myself, is the initial viewer before the viewers. What is the time period of this? Like when was Atlanta supposedly?
Oh, that's a great question. And I love how you called yourself the initial viewer before the viewers.
Yeah,
that should
yeah.
be your tagline. That's amazing.
It's a tad redundant, right?
So the timeline is actually before 10,000 BC.
Oh, geez.
And so right away, mainstream archaeology, anthropology has an enormous problem with that because their contention is civilization. And when I say civilization, that usually classifies as established cities and agriculture. Only really starts at the earliest with the Sumerians in 4000 BC.
Okay.
That's for another podcast. I think we go way earlier than that. So what we do know is where the Pillars of Hercules actually are. It is the Strait of Gibraltar. So you got Spain to the north, you got Morocco to the south. This is basically where the Mediterranean Sea empties out into the Atlantic. And so they know for sure that this is where it actually is. On the Gibraltar side, you have the Rock of Gibraltar. That's the northern mount. The southern mount is actually debated. There's two different peaks in Morocco that could be the other end of it. But what we know for sure is this is the Pillar of Hercules. So basically, Plato is telling us that Atlantis is somewhere out in the Atlantic. So that's all we really got. So thanks for that little tidbit, Plato. So the source material comes from two of his different works. It comes from the Timaeus and the Critias, and it is a dialogue of three different men who are listening to Socrates describe the ideal state, which we'll get to because some people think Atlantis wasn't meant to actually be physically real. This was like Plato's literary device to talk about an ideal society, which I disagree with, but we'll talk about. So here's how the story is fleshed out. The grandfather of the main character, Critias, is told the story of Atlantis by a man named Solon. Solon hears it while visiting Egypt. Now, Solon was probably a real person. It's debated, but they have his birth and his death, and he was supposedly a statesman from Atlantis. Solon hears this tale from an Egyptian priest, Plutarch, not Plato. Plutarch later identifies this as Sonchus of Sais, who was a real person. So basically, the Egyptian priests are talking about this older civilization. Solon hears about it, and then he brings it back to the Greeks, and then Plato hears about it. So that's the actual lineage for this story. So here are the basic key points of Atlantis. It's a naval power. It's somewhere out in the Atlantic Ocean. The main island was multi-ringed. Either it was artificially constructed or they basically terraformed the land. So you had alternating water, land, water, land. And if you read Plato's work, he's not giving vague dimensions. Their unit of length back then was called the stadia. He's saying these rings were this many stadia wide, the canals were this many stadia wide to allow the ships through. It is very, very specific. So it was not only fertile, it was ideal for agriculture. They had living creatures there from all around the world. They had many different valuable minerals in the ground. They also have this powerful navy, and eventually they get bold enough to try to invade Athens, and that's where they're repelled, where everything starts to go sideways for them. So here's the actual downfall. Either the invasion itself or the pride of the Athenians, which angered the gods, basically starts a series of earthquakes which create tidal waves, and then Atlantis sinks down into the ocean. Now, let me just get through this last thing, then we can open it up a little bit because this kind of sets the stage. So on one hand, on the skeptical side, the actual source evidence for just the Atlantis story is mostly coming from Plato. But we're going to see in just a little bit, there are a lot of stories from a lot of different cultures about something crazy going on during this time. A lot of skeptics also claim that Plato's intent was not to refer to a real geographic area. Plato basically was using Atlantis as a metaphor for an ideal nation or an ideal government. And so they would allege that we're misinterpreting that today. But at the same time, we have a lot of stories from a lot of different cultures all around the earth where they have a similar narrative. Basically, humans at a prior time were way more advanced. They inadvertently destroyed themselves with their own technology, and very little evidence is actually left of it. So, before we get into some potential culprits, because this is where things are really going to start to dovetail into other legends, anybody got any initial thoughts, feelings on Atlantis?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can we get bells?
Right. Buzzers, we buzz
Yeah,
in.
that's it.
So check it out. What I just something I never realized, because I know a little bit about this too. But we talk about Plato talking about this, and we set the time frame for Atlantis at about 10,000 BC. Was Athens around then for them to attack, or was it? Because it was
That's a good question.
It was a state. It was a fictional state according to Plato.
Yeah.
They never really attacked Athens because Athens beat them, this high power. So, and then it disappears. What if it was just Plato saying, let's root for the home team because he lived in Athens. He lived in Greece.
Yes.
So what if because when was Athens founded?
That threw me for a curveball.
Yeah.
What I can say, just thinking real quick on my feet, what's interesting, and this would be like a side thing. I've got a whole side presentation on there is no way civilization only goes back to 4000 BC.
Oh, yeah,
and we're going to hit some of these here. But what's most fascinating to me in Athens, where you have the Acropolis, everybody talks about the Acropolis. The crazy thing people don't talk about is the stones underneath the Acropolis are freaking enormous, and nobody knows who put them there, and they predate the Acropolis. What happens with a lot of these ancient sites is there was already something there, and then something built on top of it.
No doubt.
Like, quick side story, when we talk about mythical cities, it'd be a good place to talk about Troy, because for those of you listening or watching who are really skeptical on Atlantis, for many centuries, people assumed that Troy wasn't actually real either, the ransacked city in Homer's Iliad. But then in the early 1900s, a German archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann actually found it in Turkey. And the crazy thing about it, which links me back to the Acropolis, is he actually had to dig down through 11 different versions of Troy, 11 different cities to actually find the right one.
Holy shit.
And there was debate about which one it actually was, but they ended up picking one where there was a lot of charcoal and burned stones from an actual siege. So long story short, a lot of these sites are built layer on layer on layer on layer on layer. So just thinking quick on my feet to get back that, you son of a gun, I would say that could either say skeptically Plato was just making it up, or you could say Plato definitely knew that there was an
Something
Athens or something there well before the modern Greeks at the time.
Yes.
Jeez.
So is the the general accepted narrative that no civilizations, civilizations as we know it, existed before 4000 BC?
Yes,
Okay.
and it drives me crazy. And I've got a whole big thing, I've got crazy stuff, man. Crazy stuff. There is some evidence that humans and dinosaurs were actually here at the same time.
You've touched on that before.
Okay,
and
good.
I always wonder about that too.
mean
Okay,
they-
which
you
is
mean they weren't?
insane.
Huh?
I always thought they were.
Well, officially,
Were you from
the
Kentucky?
dinosaurs go extinct at the end of the Mesozoic when there's a comet or asteroid strike off the Yucatan Peninsula. That's 65 million years ago. If you believe straight up mainstream evolution, the earliest hominids, our ancestors, 2 million years ago.
Oh, wow.
So there should be at least a 63 million year gap between most recent dinosaurs, oldest humans. But there are a couple places on Earth where their footprints are preserved together. And so, I mean, I don't want to waylay this too much, but there's a lot of evidence that we go back way farther than 4000 BC.
Places in South America depict all the animals carved on the wall, and they have stegosauruses there.
Yep.
And they would have no idea what a stegosaurus looked like, but it's an actual. What is that? Pimu Punku or what's the one?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, in Bolivia.
Yeah.
What's that? Pimu Punku, Punko Pimo, Machu Picchu. I don't know.
My pronunciation on things are bad. Let's get back to Atlantis. I can pronounce.
segue.
I can pronounce that.
It'd be funny if you had a small contingent of viewers who are of Mayan lineage and they're watching this. They're like, this is
Shaking their heads.
insulting.
Who put these people on air?
Maybe I should run an ad just in that country. And
Disclaimer.
Oh, yeah.
A disclaimer.
Yeah, and see what kind of hits you get and see what comes back. Did
my
we
gosh.
totally jack this up completely?
Well, in this world, we'll probably be sued for defamation or they'll be offended in something.
So the next part of the presentation, let's just assume for a moment Plato was speaking literally and Atlantis really was out there. What types of culprits could cause such a landmass to sink down into a sea? Now, real quick footnote to this, how big was it? Because Plato says Libya and Asia together, which would be freaking enormous. But just to understand, when Plato says Asia, he is referring to Asia Minor, which was Turkey.
Right.
Now, Libya is still huge, but Libya plus Turkey is a little smaller than Libya plus...
We're not talking about Asia, the continent.
Right. Okay, so here's where I personally started to really, really get into Atlantis. And ironically, it started with another event that, as a modern Catholic, I sort of assumed was just an allegory. So a lot of modern Christians, Catholics, basically take the New Testament when Jesus was around as a lot more accurate and literal than the Old Testament. A lot of people view a lot of the Old Testament stories essentially as an allegory.
Fables, right?
Yeah, fables, exactly. Doesn't mean they're any less relevant, but they didn't actually happen. So
don't say that in the wrong wrong party. Right?
Well, does everybody here at least have like the guidelines for a flood of Noah? I assume.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So for years, I didn't really buy into this. So for those of you listening that might not know the flood of Noah story, basically people were living very, very sinful lives. God finally gets frustrated enough to just wipe the slate clean and start over, except for one just and upright man named Noah. God sends emissaries to warn Noah not to only build an ark, but to put 2 of every animal on board. So Noah obediently obeys God, and he starts to build this massive ark. So the people that lived around Noah come and start to make fun of him. Not only is it going to be so huge that there's no way he's going to be able to move it, but it's so far away from the water that it's never even going to float. But Noah obeys God. Then the rains start to come. Noah brings the animals and his family on board, and the people in the area start to pound on the side and beg to get in, but Noah doesn't. Waters rise, everybody else dies. Noah, his family, and all the animals float for 40 days. Then a dove brings back a sprig of leaf, showing that there's actual land. Waters recede, everybody gets off the ark.
What was that movie? The one that was more recent? Was it
Noah?
Tim Carell or
Steve Carell.
Steve Carell, yeah. So if you don't, if you
not Evan Almighty, but the other one.
Yeah.
No, it is Evan Almighty.
Yeah, because it was like the spinoff of like Bruce Almighty.
Yes, that's what.
So, side note, if you don't know the story, that's a good way to kind of familiarize yourself with it and get a few laughs.
Do you remember Bill Cosby's bit of Noah?
No.
When Bill Cosby was as a young comic, and I was a young kid, he put a record out, a comedy record, and he has to come, Noah, and Noah would respond, "What?" Build an ark, and then Noah would go, "Right." And then this was like his first breakthrough bit.
I didn't
Bill
know that.
Cosby, the Noah skit is big, man. That was like the thing.
I'm gonna have to listen to
That
it.
was the thing. Yes. No, the Noah skit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give it a listen.
Yeah. And it's safe for work.
Oh, okay.
You know?
So those are all your pop culture Noah references for if you
Every time
haven't-
I would go to church after, like, and it come up in catechism, and I'd be like, and all I can ever think of is this stupid recording my mother would play. Noah. What?
That's awesome.
If it's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Right. I mean, it was just you have to indulge it. It's really good. Really good.
So here was my beef with the Noah story. I thought, okay, there's no way that could be true because, number one, you would only have Noah and his family. So right away in the next generation, you would have inbreeding. You would only have, let's even say, it's true though, like, because even like certain families like royalty or like Amish cliques where like, you know.
I like how you
it's
call
just-
them cliques. Like they're so clicky. Like they just don't. They don't accept,
Talk about the other
They don't.
clicks.
Yeah, exactly. They don't accept any outsiders. They're just clicky.
The English.
We've targeted the Maya, the Amish.
Oh man,
We're getting canceled for
I
sure.
would say this episode's off to a rough start.
This
More
show's
drinks.
This show's uncancelable.
I know, right?
But so we've seen in modern times that can lead to a lot of deformities. And let's even say for a moment that you can have 2 of every animal on board an ark. you still only got 2 of every single animal. Next generation, you're going to have inbreeding. So I thought there's no way this could
Well,
be
how
true.
do you find 2 mosquitoes? Like, how would he know the sex of a mosquito?
Right.
I mean,
'Kay,
come on.
Here's where
Guided by God, Eric.
Noah.
Eric.
So here's where my mind started to change. Did you know we don't just have the Noah story? We have over 1,300 cultures that all have their own great flood stories. Here's just a
Really?
sampling.
So maybe there was more than one Noah.
So in the
They just
oldest,
weren't all named Noah. I get it.
yes, Julia, yes. So in the oldest preserved story we still have on Earth in Sumerian cuneiform, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the wrathful gods warn a just and upright man, Utnapishtim, to build a giant ship. They call it the Preserver of Life. Like Noah, he also releases a bird to look for dry land. In the holy books of India, we have the story of King Manu. The king is warned of a great flood by a talking fish who guides he and his followers to a mountaintop and safety. The ancient Chinese, who are excellent naked eye astronomers, they reported seeing 3 suns in the sky. We had our sun and then 2 additional suns. There were then violent earthquakes, and the earthquakes produced tsunamis so large that they made it dozens of miles inland. They made great lakes that didn't dry up for decades. So I start to think to myself, okay, one ark is not going to cut it. But if you've got 1,300 arks out there, you could probably actually save a lot of diversity. So my next question is, was this really the wrath of gods? Or was there something else happening in the solar system at the time? And the people simply misinterpreted this as the wrath of God or the gods. So I've got a scenario for you, and it is straight up terrifying. We always talk about things hitting into the Earth, like asteroids or comets. I talk about it in class. If you all saw, about a month ago, NASA had a space probe, the DART mission, intentionally slam into an asteroid to try to change its trajectory.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah, to actually see, could we deflect something in the future? I have a scenario that's more terrifying and doesn't even involve a collision. We are absolutely moving right now. We are flying around the Milky Way. People don't realize this, but we rotate at a speed of 1,000 miles per hour. We're revolving around the sun at a speed of 27,000 miles per hour. So right now, all of us are moving at least 28,000 miles per hour. And that honestly doesn't even factor in how fast our sun is moving around the core of the Milky Way. So we're moving really, really fast. People don't realize this because you and me and our chairs, this studio, all of Coriopolis, everything on the Earth is all doing at that speed. What if something comes through and even temporarily slows the Earth down? It would be terrifying. The land masses would stop, but all the water, all the air is still going to be moving at a speed of 1,000 miles per hour, at least for a short amount of time. So to me, boom, that's your great flood scenario happening right there. So what could have actually done this? The Sumerians identified a culprit. Have we talked Planet X Nibiru in here? Did we do that presentation?
Yes.
Good. So I'll move through this one a little bit
Zachariah
more.
returns.
Sitchin, he is back. So this is an excerpt from our Legend of Nibiru, but it ties in really well. So the Sumerians, unlike the Europeans, did correctly have a sun-centered solar system, not an Earth-centered solar system. They were ahead of Western Europe or the Western world by thousands of years. But they also said the sun, whom they called Apsu, had a distant companion that they likened with their god Marduk or Nibiru. So according to Sitchin's translations, which are very, very controversial, Nibiru looped into our inner solar system. It hit an early planet, or a moon orbiting Nibiru hits an early planet called Tiamat. The resulting collision forms the Earth, and then the moon and the asteroid belt, and then it loops back out. So the question is, does Nibiru still loop through every couple thousand years? You might remember I showed you this debated tablet, which does show what looks like the sun at the center. And people have compared it, and the planets are fairly accurately sized to scale. But then if you notice in the upper left, we've got that one extra one there, which some liken to Nibiru. So was this really a model of the solar system? Were the Sumerians just trying to make something that looked pretty on this one cylinder cell? We may never totally know for sure. But what we do know is stuff can come through our solar system. And if it comes through, it could cause disasters just by its gravitational pull without hitting into anything. So to me, one of the most terrifying culprits is a brown dwarf. I probably showed this visual during Legend of Nibiru. A brown dwarf is basically an intermediary. It's in the netherworld between big planet versus small star. So bigger than Jupiter, made of gas and dust like Jupiter, but not quite big enough to start nuclear reactions at its core, like a little red dwarf star. So brown dwarfs could be super dangerous because they're incredibly large, but because they're not starting fusion, they're not generating any of their own
So they're
light.
kind of unstable.
Yes, and they could get super close to our solar system without us actually knowing they're there. So if a brown dwarf loops through, doesn't hit anything, just its gravitational pull, that could knock planets off axes, that could cause flooding, that could deflect asteroids and comets that do hit into Earth that also cause flooding. It could be some pretty crazy stuff going down. NASA now knows there's at least 100 brown dwarfs in our solar neighborhood. That's basically just our own backyard. Now, so far, the closest one is about 4 light years away, which is way too far to ever actually affect us. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other ones out there. That doesn't mean that they've kept quiet, the ones that are a little bit closer. So there is another piece of evidence here. This great flood, was this the pole shifting or was this the whole planet shifting? I guess before I go on, because I get nervous, I talk too much. Anybody else have anything on the Nibiru side? We touched upon it in a previous episode.
Fred.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good too.
Yeah, I'm pretty engrossed in this brown dwarf situation right now.
Excellent. So we do have some evidence that Earth is going through some pretty crazy stuff. And this evidence that you see on the screen is actually accepted by geologists. But the uncomfortable part is nobody knows why it happens. I actually learned about this back in some college geology classes, late 90s, early 2000s. So what you see here is a picture of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It runs through the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Technically, good trivia, biggest mountain range on Earth. Mm-hmm. Most of it's underwater, though.
I remember that.
So this is where the seafloor actually spreads out. So what they've done is they've color-coded it. It's basically got zebra striping. For a couple thousand years, all the tiny little iron particles that are solidified in the rock are like little compass needles. They always point to magnetic north. So for a couple thousand years, they're all pointing this way. Then a couple thousand years, they're all pointing this way, and vice versa. This goes on like clockwork. Creepy thing. We're actually overdue for another pole flop. Magnetic north becomes south, south becomes north. We're overdue for one. Nobody knows why it happens. And to me, with how heavily based we are on the magnetic field today, I think, what if this goes down right during our lifetimes? What if you're in an airplane at the time? What's going to happen to our satellite grid? Is GPS going to work? Crazy stuff could go down.
So wait, does it just happen like flip on a dime, or does it happen slowly?
That's a great question. Fast.
Okay.
Yeah, we're talking basically flip of a dime. All the iron particles are pointed one way, then all of a sudden they're pointed the other way.
What is the real life consequences to Earth if that happens?
So nobody really knows for sure. So,
It's kind of like
Because all the old civilizations
kind of like
that happened to-
Y2K all over again.
Right. So skeptics would say not a lot. We can adjust our satellites. Airplanes can still fly, et cetera, et
Will
cetera.
we still call north north and south south? Like,
That's a good question. That's actually a really good question. There's an even darker side to this. Are we sure it's just the magnetic field flipping? What if it's the entire planet that's actually flipping? So very quickly, here's the magnetic field. Without the magnetic field, we would not be alive. It basically captures highly energetic particles from the sun called the solar wind, and it traps them in donut-shaped regions called the Van Allen belts, and it protects us
Van
from...
Halen.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah.
sorry.
No, that was good. In this studio, that was a very good reference. So it protects us from things on the Earth. So is there a chance it's not just the magnetic field? What if it's the entire planet flipping? At least one mysterious man thought that. Did we cover this during Nibiru? I feel like we did. I don't know.
Think
Okay.
this-
refresh
Okay.
my-
I don't
Okay,
think this
good.
Yeah,
part.
keep
Okay,
going.
good. So this man was named Chan Thomas. He wrote a book called The Adam and Eve Story, The History of Cataclysms. So what he did was some really rock solid, pardon the pun, geology in the northern United States and Canada. And he actually looked at a lot of these iron particles, and he basically tracked how the pole was very, very rapidly shifting. He must have been on to something because the CIA actually intervened and classified the book, said you're not allowed to publish this anymore. Now, people listening think, there's no way that can be real. You've got freedom of speech. You technically don't. The United States government can still intervene, and it can classify things or inventions that, quote unquote, jeopardize the national security of the United States. Within the last decade, I checked, and they have stepped in or intervened on about 3,000 different things. So Thomas wasn't allowed to publish the book for decades. Now, the book is back out. You can get it, but the legend is that it is actually a highly sanitized version now. Another person who came to a similar conclusion was a very good geologist named Charles Hapgood. Now, Hapgood's reasoning was different. He thought that uneven distributions of polar ice was causing the whole planet to flip. And the interesting thing with Hapgood is he didn't even advocate for a physical flip. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with plate tectonics, right? Earth is basically like a bunch of puzzle pieces. The plates move but very slowly. Hapgood had a different take, and I find it fascinating. Underneath the crust, which is called the lithosphere, you have a layer called the astenosphere. Thank you, college geology. It is basically plasticky. And when they say plasticky with rocks, it basically means like the consistency of silly putty. So Hapgood's take was plate tectonics are real, but because of this plasticky layer, every now and then the entire crust can shift. Now, most people haven't heard of Hapgood, but they have heard of this man. He and Einstein corresponded in a series of letters. Einstein was such a fan of the theory, he actually wrote the foreword to Hapgood's book. So, for those of you listening or watching, if you think this sounds really, really conspiratorial, just understand some of the most brilliant minds in history have been big advocates of this idea. So let's say a brown dwarf comes through, doesn't hit the Earth, but it gets really, really close. Earth flips. The water, the air keep moving at 1,000 miles per hour. That could submerge a lot of different places in short succession, including Atlantis. Could it have even moved Atlantis rather than sunk it and moved it to a different part of Earth where it might be in plain sight today, but we just aren't looking for it? I know Fred knows, he's nodding his head. We'll come to that in just a little bit. Now, I can give a bunch more less crazy theories about why Atlantis disappeared. Before I get to that, wanted to open it up. Does anybody have any other thoughts? Does this sound likely that something could have come through, slowed the Earth down, caused this flooding event? It was a natural occurrence, but our ancestors just mistook it for the wrath of the gods.
Okay, so help me understand the idea of time in regards to our view of it and our measurement of our lives and an event like that happening. If this actually happened, would we be seeing this thing move in our sky for days, for a half a second, for 3 hours? Like, how long would it take for that red dwarf to be visible cutting across our skyline?
Oh, that's
You know,
a
like,
great
what-
question.
and what time?
Yes.
Because the time thing about all of this is what freaks me out when you talk about
Okay.
astronomy. It's like
Yes.
we view we're only here 60, 80 years, but we talk in terms of
Talking like
time
80,
like
90.
billions of years.
Right. I would say that space agencies, observatories, could spot it years ahead of time.
Right.
Now, what they're seeing, single point of light on the sky. How do you know it's coming at us? What they can calculate is called blue shifts and red shifts. So think about the Doppler effect with sound. If an ambulance is coming towards you, think about like an accordion. The sound waves are
Yep.
compressing air, like nah, 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 nah. Then as it goes away, it's like nah, 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 nah,
Right.
nah. So like the sound waves are stretching out. So with light, it's called a Doppler effect. Something out in space coming towards us. The light is going to get blue shifted from
Right.
where it should be
Right.
because they're compressing. Moving away from us gets red shifted. So if something has an extreme blue shift that we don't think it should, it means it's coming towards us. They can actually calculate the velocity towards us, the side-to-side velocity. So there is a chance that space agencies could know about this years ahead of time. If you remember the Planet X discussion, there was an astronomer that thinks he actually found Planet X. He reported it decades ago,
Right.
and then he died from cancer within like 5 days. The other reason that the human population could not see it until the last minute, if it is a brown dwarf, it's only radiating in the infrared part of the spectrum. So big observatories that have infrared scopes, again, could spot it years ahead of time. When would it actually be naked eye visible? Probably when it got around the orbits of Jupiter or Saturn, I would say. And so depending how fast it's coming in, what its trajectory is coming in, you might have a couple months to
Okay,
prepare
that
for
was
it
my-
coming in.
that was
couple
my-
months.
One of the speculations is why people aren't allowed in down to Antarctica is it's coming from the South Pole, so you can't see it. So the only way you can see Nibiru coming back into it, it's not on the axis of this, it's on the axis of this. So, and that's why they say it's approaching from the south, and they don't want anybody to know.
Because that's where Robert Harrington, the astronomer who died suddenly of cancer, he basically, based on his calculations, as Fred alluded to, he thought you could see it with even a large backyard telescope, but only from the southern hemisphere because it was coming up
Interesting.
below
Great, I
the
get on
plane.
a plane in 5 days.
Yeah, right. So he goes to the southern hemisphere, then sends a wire to NASA and the U.S. Naval Observatory that he found Planet X. And then 5 days later, he died of cancer that he hadn't had at the time. So nobody hears about the story.
So wait, I have one more question. So if this event is potentially what caused Atlantis to sink, wouldn't there have been multiple other world events that would have occurred, or is what you're describing here like coinciding with the time of Noah's flood? That's the theory that we're going on?
All
this
of
one?
those
Okay,
things.
all right. I just want to make sure I'm following. Okay, thank
No,
you.
both questions you
Forgive the
asked were
slower
good.
person here.
No. So, Great Flood of Noah, Atlantis, and we're also going to see there are multiple sunken cities around the Earth.
Okay.
And the last time that sea level was low enough for them to be above the water, 10,000 BC. If you read enough of this stuff, the 10,000 BC date shows up over and over and over again. It seems like we might not know for certain, but there was some type of civilization reset around 10,000 BC. Then our ancestors basically muddle about for a couple thousand years, try to restart things, and then finally by 4,000 BC, we once again have something resembling civilization. That's at least my take.
And so wait, then just so I know the timeline again, first like humanoid or whatever you call it, first man resembling a person. What is that date compared to the first civilization?
Great question. If you believe just the straight up mainstream archaeology, 2 million years ago. So if you think about
So what's 2 million compared to BC? What are we talking like?
2 million BC.
yeah, 2
2
million
mil-
BC.
so 2 million BC.
Yes.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
not 2 million from now.
Well, great question. It would only be a difference of 2,000 years.
which
is gone.
compared
I was
Okay.
trying to do the quick math in my head to be a smart ass, but I couldn't.
I guess like I don't consider the fact that we're only in like the grand scheme of time, because obviously like you said, like I think that's one of the things like I have such a hard time with sometimes, and I think the average person struggles with this too, is just my comprehension of time.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about this multiple times on the show, is that just the way time is viewed, the way time is perceived, the way time is experienced, that like I don't consider that the way that we're calculating time right now is only, like you said, 2,222.
Yeah, we're a speck.
Or,
our
sorry,
our
yeah.
existence is a speck in the broad scheme
No,
of the whole
2022.
package of
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
as we know it. That's
Yeah.
that's a deep route to go, because like there's a theory out there that time is all finite. Like there's no beginning and there's no pre and post. Everything is there,
Right.
and we're just kind of moving through this like loaf of bread. It's all
Yeah.
static.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I'm going down a different road,
Right.
but that's
Okay.
crazy.
All right, cool.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you have that question, then listeners definitely do. And to your point, part of the reason that archaeology has been able to get away with all this contradictory nonsense is people just don't really think about it in their head. If they think about the math, they're going to realize, whoa, wait a minute. Like, we've got these artifacts here, but these artifacts don't jive with what you're saying at all. But to most modern people today, it's just a really long time ago. So it all blends together. Nobody asks questions.
Well, and that's, I guess, kind of what I'm trying to almost like create a cohesive timeline and, in my mind for is that so the first like man that resembles who we are now is 2 million years ago, but the first civilization doesn't happen until 4000 BC.
Yes.
So like that whole time period, people just couldn't get it together. Like they couldn't
Oh, they got together and they destroyed each other.
Well,
It's
that's
kind of
what I
like
mean.
2020.
It's like they just couldn't like
together.
get it like to the point where they could actually have I don't know. It just sounds unlikely that it would go that like people that it would take that long for people to. And I understand that the first like person resembling us was not necessarily what we exist as now.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
so that the cognitive abilities or whatever, but like it just seems like a really long time.
I don't know, though. I've got some people I graduated high school with who still live with their parents. So based on them, if you extrapolate, I could see it. But to your point, because you bring up great stuff, Julia, I completely agree with you. I think the way I see human lineage, I look at it more like a saw blade. I call it the saw blade model. I don't think that this time is the only time we've been up like that. I think it's arrogance on the part of humans today. Well, like, we have to be it. Like, it's never been better than this. I think we keep getting built up. Something knocks us down. We build up, something knocks down. And we can only see the most recent peak and maybe a little bit of the one before that. And that's throwing off all our numbers. So part of the reason I'm a big fan of, like, the Nibiru angle, if something did loop through every 10,000 years, that's almost a civilization.
I see what
right
you're
there.
saying. Okay. So it's like that recurring event is kind of baked in to restart.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
On that note.
There's more.
But wait.
A woolly mammoth, is it more elephant or more walrus?
Let's take a side note.
Mammoth.
I'm going to go.
What's a mammoth? I don't know what a mammoth is.
Well, nobody really knows, because here's the crazy thing about woolly mammoths. I'm glad you brought it up. Where they have found them, I'm so glad you brought it up. Where they have found them flash frozen, they have jungle vegetation in their mouths. So this whole idea, this whole assumption that woolly mammoths were in these cold
Like the
tundra
Arctic, yeah.
areas is probably wrong. They probably were more elephant-like. Now, here's the crazy part. How in the world could a woolly mammoth be jumping down jungle vegetation
yeah.
and then suddenly is flash frozen? Once again, evidence that the entire Earth shifted. Something
you're
crazy
saying
went
that
down.
there wouldn't be that type of vegetation in the colder
Yes,
climates.
that's what I'm saying. Yes.
It
So all of
happened
a sudden
overnight almost.
Well, don't
Yes.
they like show that on like different like documentaries and movies and stuff where all of a sudden it's like ice like forming or whatever. It's like
So wait
You
a
know what I-
second.
like, I don't know if
I'm
that's real,
confused.
but I'm
You're
just saying, like-
if it's flips, you're
Yeah.
saying like Hawaii
Yeah.
is going to be like the Arctic.
So check it out.
You're
Take
setting
the
us,
equator air. Is that right?
Take a
you're
ma-
setting us up so well for later in the presentation.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Fred.
So take a magnet, put it on a table, and put another magnet down. You see how fast that flips. Now you got to think of the size and the scale of what you have on the table. All right, let's put something out there that makes us flip on a giant scale, and it's going to flip us that fast. So let's just say some places that didn't have ice, it gets flipped. And you got your jungle vegetation with your in your mammoth's mouth, and suddenly, within hours, they're freezing their ass off, but they're still eating. They're like, because by then the snow wouldn't have been there by then, because it would have been so fast. But they're still eating, but they don't. It's going to get cold really quick. So places that didn't have ice suddenly have ice.
You just said something brilliant that I never even thought of.
Oh, don't tell him
No.
that. Please don't tell him that.
So in terms of solar system
Oh, shit.
interlopers coming through,
Yep.
I only ever thought gravitational pull. I never even thought magnetic fields. What if Earth is sitting there north-south oriented? Nibiru comes through
it's the opposite.
south-north
Yep.
oriented. So then Earth swings around to match its magnetic field.
That's exactly how that's what I was thinking on that. It's just one of these things I do.
Gosh darn slingshot up in here.
But yeah, so I mean, it depends on
My head hurts.
on what we're coming close to.
Someday, like 3 years from now, I publish a scientific paper. Fred's like, that son of a bitch, that was my idea.
Ripped off again. And then ripped off again.
So let's talk some ideas that are a little less crazy, just in case anybody's out there and they're like, you know what, I kind of like the Atlantis thing, but that sounds a little too far. Could some other things have flooded Atlantis? So Pleistocene epoch. So today we are in the Holocene, which is modern times. The Pleistocene ends around 11,700 years ago. Once again, notice the time frame. It's around 10,000 BC if you do the math. So at this time, the glaciers and the ice caps were at their extreme extent. This is an artist's conception of how big the polar ice caps would have been at the time. You can see they get the whole way down to the northern United States. Or anytime, if you're driving even here in Pennsylvania, you know how you drive by like those, they're called scree fields? Like you're driving and then an entire mountain, the trees stop and it's just a whole bunch of rocks. And did you ever think where those rocks come from? Officially, they came from glaciers, where glaciers basically deposited that as glacial till.
Moraine State Park.
There you go.
Rep 7.
Yeah, thank you. So I did some quick math because, Julie, you were asking about the math. So if you think about it, if it ends 11,700 years ago, you got to factor in we're in 2000 AD. That's 9,700 BC. Once again, it's right around that 10,000 BC mark right there. So is there a chance that civilization existed earlier to that? A lot of cultures trace their origins to well before 10,000 BC. This 4,000 BC date is just kind of something that modern anthropology is trying to like pigeonhole in there. So, Julie, you asked another excellent question earlier. Do we have some other evidence that it wasn't just Noah, where there are some other things? We do. We have sunken cities all around the world. Now, the understanding here is humans are not building these cities underwater. They were built on dry land. So when was the last time that the water level was low enough? 10,000 BC, when the ice caps were much larger. So if you think about it, ice cap is bigger, that's taking up more of your water, ocean levels drop. So skeptics know about these places, and they all dismiss them as just natural phenomenon. But this is one of the best ones. This is Yonaguni, Japan. You can see all the parallel lines. Now, from a geology perspective, I can say when old lava tubes get exposed in like Iceland or Greenland, that's called columnar basalt. And like it forms naturally and it does look pretty parallel. But here in Yonaguni, Japan, we have stairways, we have passageways, we have doorways, we have 90-degree angles. So in my personal opinion, to look at all this and say this is all natural phenomena, there is just no absolute way that that is really possible. So the idea here is these things were actually built above the water at a much earlier time. Then suddenly or gradually, the water levels rise, all these different cities flood out. Now, I'll skip through this one pretty quick, but it's all relative. Did the water levels really rise, or did the land levels just actually sink down? We have some evidence of this. These are underwater mountains. They're called seamounts. Like even if you think of the Hawaiian Islands, it's kind of cool. If you actually look at a bathymetry map, like the elevation of the ocean floor, you've got your Hawaiian Islands, but then before and after the islands, you have underwater mountains too that are called seamounts. So there's two different possibilities here. The volcano does erupt. The island is above the water. It gets eroded down. It disappears. That's called a guyot. Or the other possibility is it never just actually got high enough up. So what if Atlantis was actually a guyot and it just started to cool and actually sink down? So it's not quite as exciting of a possibility, but this is one. This is a really cool hand-drawn map from a book my grandma had on Atlantis. It was awesome. Years ago, we found my grandma had a bunch of those old books from like the 60s and 70s, like Chariots of the Gods.
Be careful now.
Yeah. But she had a bunch of these. I think, well, maybe this is where I get it from. So I was looking through this. So this is the bathymetry of the Atlantic Ocean, the ocean floor. And you can see what certainly looks like a pretty large landmass out in the middle of it, but it's down under the water. I'll come back to that book at the very end. Could it have just been a localized disaster? Was it not really a global great flood? Was it something local? We do have some evidence that volcanic eruptions totally wiped out some
Oh
civilizations.
yeah. What's the most famous one?
Pompeii
Yeah.
and Vesuvius, yeah.
Yes.
And so this was Thera. It destroyed the Minoan civilization. You can see the before and after. Now check out the after on the right. Does anybody notice anything curious about the shape of the
Yeah,
islands?
it looks like the UK.
Islands
kinda-
and rings.
Fred, you're on fire today. So people saw, I mean, Eric, you do good too. You do good things here. So this was an enormous explosion. They estimate it was the equivalent of 20 modern atomic bomb blasts. It was 100 times more powerful than Vesuvius, but notice the overall shape that is left. So just to try to show the skeptical side, it leaves a ring shape. So some people think this was the basis for Plato's story about Atlantis, shaped like different rings.
Wait, stop. So, what you just circled there, take 100-mile view from that back. Does that not look like UK, the Baltic states, Ireland, and then the Greenland in there? Doesn't that look like the...
Oh, well, the Greenland thing, I understand it's a before after, but the UK thing I totally agree with. It looks like Ireland on the left, the UK on the right, or England on the right there. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
I
this is on a real small scale.
Yeah, it is a good bit smaller than the UK. Okay, here's where things get wild. Over break, and Eric always cuts us out of recording, but Fred was already putting the pieces together and already mentioned this. Is there a chance it wasn't the wrath of God or the gods that did in the Atlanteans? It was their own technology actually backfiring on them. So kind of a modern addition to the Plato legend is that people try to look to explain why the Atlanteans are so advanced. And the idea here, you see it in some New Agey books, you see it in UFO books, is that they had some type of energy crystal technology. Nobody really elaborates on how it works or why it worked, but they had something, it backfired and destroyed the land. Now, I can't speak as much to energy crystals, but one thing we can speak of that can definitely backfire is atomic weaponry. Is there a chance that the Atlanteans already were a nuclear power, and that's what actually vanquished them? We have a lot of evidence that ancient human beings either had nuclear power or they were destroyed by nuclear power from somewhere
Indians,
else.
right?
Yes.
In India, right?
Oh, yes.
Pakistan, yeah.
Eric, you were right on the mark. That'll be my next slide. So first, let's talk real quick about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Can anybody give me the background on this one from the Old Testament?
Come on, Fred.
I'll do it. So, Sodom and Gomorrah were wicked places on earth, according to the Bible. If you want to get into it, that they were doing immoral things according to the laws that the god or gods had laid down. So, to
What
teach
kind of immoral things? Fred?
lots of immoral.
it was-
Listening to that heavy metal music.
So what they did was
Among other things.
so what they did was they told Lot, they said, look, man, just like they did to Noah, they're like, you're a good guy.
Is that where sodomy came from?
Yes, it is. Yep. So if you want to get into it, some angels came down to check out what was going on, and a bunch of dudes tried to rape them. And that's pretty bad.
I was going to mention that. That's how bad it was that
That's
even
how-
the messengers from God almost got
So they
pulled
came
into
down
this.
to check out, are these people worthy? So again, now here you go with, now we're going to cross over into the alien thing. So you've got the gods that make man, and they're up there, they're watching their creation, and they're like, dude, these guys are just, they're fucking everything. And where's my swear jar? So they're screwing everything, and even the messengers of God. And these guys are like, look, man, these guys are immoral. So they find Lot, who probably helped them out. He's like, look, man, you leave these cats alone. You know, they're
And porn was invented.
They're glowing beings, and I know they're hot, but let me help you guys out here. And he says, look, man, since you helped us out and got us away from that mob of rapists, you know what? You and your family take off to the desert, and we'll take care of these guys. But do me a favor, don't look back, because if you look back, we're going to turn you guys into salt. And they're like, sure.
Yeah, I
So,
forgot this part.
so, I mean, I'm making it funny, but that's exactly it. It was immoral, and the gods said, look, we got to destroy these guys because it's gotten out of hand here, because they didn't like us to begin with. They didn't want us. We were a
Yeah,
creation that got out of control.
They were not our biggest fans.
Well, if you want to get back into things like that, we were given technology. We shouldn't have had technology. We were given, free will. So the gods weren't happy with us to begin with. And if you want to get down to it, some kind of science experiment. So these angels are they come down, check it out, their experiment. They almost get raped. They get out of there with their lives. They let Lot go. So what did they rain down on them? The only thing that people could think of is things called fire and brimstone. And what they did was they destroyed the 2 cities.
That was a great segue. That was such a great setup. Awesome, Fred.
I feel like
It's the heavy metal version of the
You should
Bible.
have your own podcast where you just tell Bible stories like that. I feel like that would be a better way for kids to learn.
Like if you recorded a series of audio CDs, like the Old Testament according to Fred.
Fred, you saw the book of James. You've seen Exodus. Wait till you see the book of Fred. So anyway, these fucking guys come down.
Oh my
So
God.
what we have left in Israel to this day is a pillar of salt that some people have dubbed Lot's wife. It's literally made of salt. But there's a different take that comes from Eric von Däniken and the like. What if, quote unquote, turn to salt didn't mean literally turn to salt? It meant vaporized, turn into tiny particles, vitrified, turn to glass. So what's interesting, they know where Sodom and Gomorrah stood. In both areas, there are higher than level normals of radioactivity. And then, as Eric mentioned, vitrified glass. And so far, vitrified glass can only happen 2 ways. Lightning strikes, which will make a real small amount of it, but then we accidentally discovered out in the 1940s when we set off atomic weapons, that makes a lot of vitrified glass. So, kind of terrifying. It's not just Sodom and Gomorrah. There are hill forts throughout the northern European continent that are also vitrified. You can actually see it in the inset there on the left. The darker area are places where the rocks of the hill fort has been turned to glass. We also have on the right, and that's a real picture, and it's terrifying, but we have the skeletal remains basically frozen in place that are highly radioactive. Now, if we just had Sodom and Gomorrah, you could say, well, we can't say what happened. It was really, really crazy. We have other places, and both Eric and Fred alluded to this one. We have Mohenjo-Daro. So the Hindu texts, which have a very extraterrestrial story arc through them, claim that a city of 30,000 was warned 7 days ahead of time, just like Lot, to flee. So 40 to 44 people stick around. They don't flee. Their radioactive mangled skeletons are now found within the city. And there's been good research on this. So a lot of times in the media today, scientists try to portray, quote unquote, the science. And they say, well, this is the science. And they lead you to believe that everybody doing the science is doing it the same way. And if anybody says anything else, they're not a true scientist. They're not doing the science. But we have a lot of brilliant people throughout history who are doing the science, and they're coming to different conclusions, and they end up being basically relegated to the footnotes of history. So here we have a British researcher, Dave Davenport, and he wrote a book, 2000 BC, Atomic Destruction. And he did a lot of research at the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, and he believed it was destroyed by an atomic blast. Here is some of the actual evidence. In the center of the city, there's a 50-yard wide epicenter. Everything is crystallized, fused, melted. To actually melt this rock, you would have to get up to at least 1,500 degrees Celsius. Now, from the epicenter, this is interesting. The bricks are only melted on one side. They're only melted ringing the center, which indicates a directional blast. Skeletons are flattened to the ground, 50 times more radioactive than the background radiation, which is very similar, tragically, to what Hiroshima and Nagasaki had after they were leveled during World War II. This also comes from the Mahabharata, which are the holy books of India.
I couldn't remember the name.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty long name. So can I just read this real quick, Eric? So think about this and then think about what an atomic weapons blast actually looks like. White-hot smoke that was 1,000 times brighter than the sun rose in infinite brilliance and reduced the city to ashes. Water boiled. Horses and war chariots were burned by the thousands. The corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings. It was a terrible sight to see. Never before have we seen such a ghastly weapon. And so it sounds a lot like an atomic weapons blast today, but this is all just lumped together as the wrath of the gods or ancient science fiction, and a lot of people ignore it. We have other places too. This is the Libyan desert glass. So I mentioned Libya earlier in relation to Atlantis, and this is pretty wild. You probably know the Sahara Desert is all across northern Africa. It's one of the most desolate places on earth. Was it always that way? So what we have here, the only explanation that astronomers can give is that there was a meteorite impact that actually did this. But so far, anything that vitrifies is lightning strikes or nuclear blasts. And there's so much desert glass. This is interesting. On the right, the Egyptians prized it, and they actually found it in at least one of the amulets inside King Tut's tomb. So this is what the vitrified glass looks like. It sticks out like a sore thumb. And so even mainstream astronomy is coming in the back door, and they're saying, did the shift of the Earth's orbit actually change the Sahara? Because different artifacts left in the Sahara by people who live there depict it being very, very lush, depict a lot of animal life, which there isn't today. Could it have been an atomic blast? And I may have shared this quote before. This is one of my favorite pictures in the history of science. Robert Oppenheimer, brilliant, head of the Manhattan Project, when they do the first atomic bomb test at the Trinity site, doesn't quote something or say something modern, but he goes back and he quotes the Mahabharata. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. He was very humbled, and he even said he didn't think they created or discovered nuclear power. He basically said he thinks they were the first to rediscover it from a much earlier time. So could the Atlanteans have either destroyed themselves or been victims to an atomic blast? So let me just throw out two more quick possibilities, but they're crazy. And then we could maybe take a quick break as we head down the home stretch. Is there a chance Atlantis was here, but instead of sinking, it actually took off? So what's fascinating, if you look at a lot of early maps, they have islands on them that are no longer there. Now, skeptics would say, well, these were errors in cartography. Either they were mistakenly recording a large landmass as an island, or they added islands to illustrations in empty areas. They wanted to create their own legends. But what's interesting is multiple maps all show the same islands. And what's also really interesting is a lot of cultures report some of these islands basically looking like circular bronze shields in the water, or like bronze tortoise shells. So one of the ideas, and we owe this to ancient aliens, is these weren't actually permanent islands. These were really large ships sitting in the water, and then they took off from there. So that could lead us into talk about USOs, unidentified submerged objects. And one of the most famous sightings in history was actually that from none other than Christopher Columbus. He and his crews on the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria recorded a bright object coming up out of the water and ascending into the sky, which they actually took as a good omen. And then the very next day, they actually discovered the New World. We also have stories, and I found this fascinating. Mount Olympus, the mythological or maybe physical real home of the Greek gods, it was said to always be bathing the mountain in smoke and fire around it. And then eventually the top of Mount Olympus takes off and ascends up to the sky. And this sounds very, very similar to accounts of Moses going up the mountain to receive the Ten Commandments. So some people have asked, what if some of these things that the ancients were recording as islands or mountains weren't really permanent features? What if they were actually physical ships? Anybody have anything quick on this one before I throw out one last crazy possibility?
Well, I guess it's somewhat related. Since the disclosure in the New York Times, in 19 or 2017, whenever it was, that the government disclosed that there's things coming here that they can't identify. Supposedly, the focus is now, with all these pilots coming back, that most of them are originating from water. And Rogan just had another pilot on, younger pilot, who.
I saw a clip from that. Yeah.
And he said that and he was parsing his words because I think he was being careful of what he said and what he didn't say, but he led the listeners to believe that by what he didn't say is that there is some absolutely horrifying things coming out of the ocean and that we don't have the ocean mapped. People, there's a misnomer that the human map, that's a misnomer that us as a human civilization have mapped every inch of the ocean and we understand it. We don't, apparently. No, what the hell is under there?
Like the deep ocean, like it's funny because when I was younger, like certain things about space used to terrify me because of just like the infinite nature. But then like the deep ocean too, I feel like it's such an unknown, like you said, like kind of like unmapped territory.
And let me ask you what your thought is. Do you think, because we're living in 2022 and technology is pretty unbelievable now. I would think that if there was a group of people, technology folks and science folks that got together, that they could figure out a way to map every ounce of that ocean. We have the brain power to do it, I believe. But we've chosen not to. And my question to you is, have we chosen not to, or have the powers that be chosen not to because of nefarious reasons?
You guys are setting me up so easy. In just a couple slides, we're going to see where at one point Google Earth accidentally mapped something on the ocean floor that some people mistook for Atlantis, and then they wiped it off of maps. So I would completely agree with you. Some people believe that there are actually more USOs out there than UFOs. Most people think they're probably one and the same. Like whatever technology this is, it can basically create a temporary field distortion around it. So it could pass from water right down from air right down into water, or from water right to air, just like you and I were walking around with no actual difference.
And if the whole purpose of this intellectual being or beings is to stay out of sight and observe us, what better way to stay out of sight is to be quote unquote based under the water?
There are, and we'll get into this next time with the Bermuda Triangle, but there's not just the Bermuda Triangle. People probably know in Japan there is the Devil's Triangle. And I've even seen maps where if you really want to map magnetic anomalies in areas of high disappearances, one alarming map I saw actually had triangular areas the whole way around the equatorial region. And so I think to myself, if you really were an advanced civilization and you wanted to keep tabs on a more primitive civilization, what a better place to hide than the ocean, and what a better place to build all of your observation points than around the equator of that planet down under the ocean. So I completely agree.
That's pretty heady.
We're about to get even headier. Is there a chance Atlantis was here, but it's in a parallel dimension, and it's why we can't actually find it? So here's just an artist's conception, not just of Atlantis, which you see to the right, but then there were always legends of the mythical island of Mu, M-U, which was somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. Here you can see, and you can tell maybe from the font if you're an Ancient Aliens fan, this is a screenshot from Ancient Aliens, the land of Kumari Kondam. Now, if you look at the shape, a lot of skeptics and geologists would tell you this has nothing to do with another dimension. These are land bridges. So, for example, one a lot closer to home, a lot of people think when sea level was lower, there was a land bridge that connected Yakutsk from Russia with Alaska, and that's how we have a lot of the same species. But some people ask, what if we actually have parallel dimensions? So this is a pretty big thing in physics now, and it is getting more and more well respected. We talk about that a lot when we get to time travel. Can you affect the past, or would you jump over to a parallel time frame? So the idea here is the reason we have some primitive ancestral knowledge of Antarctica, but we can't physically find it, is that it is in a parallel world line to ours. So it's not just Atlantis, but it's Mu. It's all these land bridges. So here's a really nice example. We could say we are essentially in, let's say we're in this world line right here. In our world line, maybe Antarctica never actually happened. But in this world line and then the one right beside it, it did. And so then there's some bleed over. Or another possibility, maybe all these world lines aren't always straight. And by the way, friends, when I say world line, this comes up a lot in physics time travel books. What you're seeing is basically a four-dimensional representation of our planet. We have our three dimensions in which we live, front to back, left to right, up, down. But then if you actually mapped out linear time with it as well, it would make this line. So think about, instead of parallel train tracks, if we have switching train tracks, like a junction. We could have been on this world line where Atlantis did exist, but then something happened, the track shifted, and we got jumped onto this one. So we have a memory of it, but it didn't actually happen in our reality.
Which is the
today.
argument for deja vu.
Yes.
Am I right? I mean,
Yes.
in general theory.
Isn't that also like the what is it, the whatever effect, the Mandela effect?
Mandela, yes.
Isn't that part of like the theory behind that too? Okay.
Did we talk time travel in here? They all run together for me.
We've touched it on different
it.
subjects, but I mean, like, we have not done a full show on it. No, I mean, I've done it a bit with my physicist. We've talked about that from a purely scientific perspective. He does not go down the speculative like stuff, but that's not fun. So.
I know. I mean, like, take me over the bridge.
I have a whole presentation called "Accidental Time Travelers and Mandela Effect."
We have to do that. We have to do that.
Is there?
That needs to get bumped up to the next one, I think.
Should we ever have a podcast where the physicist is here too, or would that just make
I haven't.
worlds
No,
collide?
not at all. I haven't brought it up to Patrick yet, but I think I may.
Okay.
I think I may.
Patrick, if you're out there,
Yeah, he's
we're
out
coming
there.
for you.
He's out there.
So, Eric, I'm so glad you brought up what you did earlier. Some people think we have already found evidence of Atlantis in Google Earth, but it got covered up. So check this out. Decide what you think on your own. This was found a number of years ago just by like a regular person like us. Somebody was cruising Google Earth and they were looking at the bathymetry. That's just the fancy word I mentioned before for the elevation of the ocean floor rather than land, which is called topography. And off of the western coast of Africa, maybe about where Plato said Atlantis might be, this grid work pattern was found. Now, what I found most curious...
Are we looking through the water to the floor of the ocean? Is that what we're seeing?
Yes, exactly. Great question. What was most curious to me is how Google responded to this. Number one, they said, no, that's nothing on the ocean floor. That is just the line that a survey ship took while it was surveying the ocean. And number two, they then took it one step further and totally wiped this grid work off of Google Earth. Now, I say to my students, I say, guys, I don't care if you've never been in a big boat, even if you've just been on a fishing boat or a canoe, how possible is it to make your boat turn at right angles? It's pretty darn tough. And then Google basically goes one step farther and totally eliminates this from all their maps. You could go to Google Earth now and not find it anywhere there, which I found to be super duper sus.
That you just skipped over that little
From Futurama.
I would say I remembered the cartoon.
So some other possibilities. This is in the African nation of Mauritania. It is called the Eye of the Desert. So Fred, what here might make people recall Atlantis?
Concentric rings within
Thank you.
rings.
Perfect. So some people think this was Atlantis. It's right there. Now, from my geology background, here's the official explanation. For starters, look where Mauritania is. Notice north of it, we do have the Pillars of Hercules right there. But this is officially a Rashat structure. So this happens when crust gets pushed up into what's called an anticline. It gets curved up. And then over time, it gets eroded down. Or just think if you cut an onion in half and then you took the cut side, put it face down on your countertop, and then with a very sharp knife started to cut off layers, the onion would look like this from above. So some people have said, this isn't really Atlantis, it's just this geologic structure. What's interesting, though, is some people who have actually been in Mauritania have been able to find water erosion from one ring passing into the next ring, which shouldn't happen with just a straight up Rashat structure. So I found that interesting. There's another possibility. What if Atlantis is actually in France? Sens, France in particular. So everybody thinks the Vikings are pretty cool today, but the Vikings were absolutely ruthless and lethal. If you had a Viking raiding party coming, it was going to be bad news for everybody in your city. They destroyed almost every coastal area they saw. Almost, except for Sens, France. Instead of destroying it, the Vikings gradually just settled it and intermingled with the people. So some people think this was actually their possible mythical homeland of Valhalla, or the mythical drowned land of Eyes, Y-S-Eyes. And the cool thing, I'm pretty sure that's where the term island actually comes from, is Eyes. So here's a map of Sens, France. Now, be careful, your brain kind of reverses it. Up here is the English Channel. So what you are seeing here is land. All of these rings are real. These are ancient ditches and road structures. And if you look at the overall scope of it, the size of it, and the structure, it does look pretty similar to that multi-ring structure that Fred mentioned earlier of Atlantis. Now, this is the real big swerve here. Anybody got any thoughts before we really go deep here? And I will say we are coming towards the end of the presentation, but I've saved some of the best stuff for last. Could Atlantis be hidden in plain sight? Could it still be above water today, but we're not paying attention? Could Atlantis actually be Antarctica? Now, stop me if we've talked about this, but there are multiple maps showing Antarctica at a time when humans should not have known about Antarctica. Officially, Antarctica was not even discovered until the 1850s, which sounds to people like a stretch because on a map it looks so big, right? But sometime look at Antarctica on an actual globe, because the issue is if you try to project a spherical object, sorry flat earthers, on a fat map, you're going to get distortion. You're either going to get distortion at the polar regions or you're going to get it at the equator. Almost every map made is willing to do the trade-off of the polar regions. They want the equator accurate because that's where people live. So on flat maps, Antarctica looks way bigger than it really is. It's also covered in miles and miles of ice. So it's not discovered till the 1850s. The land outline isn't known until the 1980s. A book I just read said the 1960s. But either way, it's not known till modern times, where they actually set off seismic charges to measure where the ice stopped, land began. Yet somehow in the 1500s, in the Dark Ages, we have multiple maps showing Antarctica. Check this out. This is from the Turkish Army General Piri Reis. Reis supposedly made this map off of 12 earlier maps he had seen. You can see the bump of Africa, the bump of South America. This is the technical cartography term, the bump. And then down here you see what a lot of people say is the Antarctic coastline. Now, skeptics have said, whoa, wait a minute. That's not Antarctica. That's more of South America, but Reis's map is getting distorted at the poles just like our maps do today. Okay, maybe. Nobody can explain the Orontes Phineas map. This comes from French mapmaker Orontes Phineas. Here you can see South Africa, Madagascar, South America, southern tip, and right here is Antarctica. Not only is it only 2 degrees off of where it currently is today, but notice the detail Phineas has. He is showing you river basins and mountain ranges.
How would he know this?
That's the question. Unless it moved.
Unless it moved.
And these are from older maps.
Slight aside, because I will forget to ask when we're done, it pertains to this. Is there... This is a whole show to me, but is there a presentation or some media out there explaining the history of map making and how the hell we were able to create the extensive maps in an era where we were not able to propel ourselves up and look down on it? Like, how in the living hell could humans accurately depict the world without communication devices, without flight? It doesn't make any sense.
Were we unable to do that, Eric? Were we not able to fly? So check it out, man. If you look back in like even Indian texts, the Ramanas and shit like that, they talk. You know, they knew all the area of their land and stuff like that. These are made. This map was made from previously known older maps. So maybe this cat didn't himself go down to Antarctica. We probably did, but what he found was
he walked it.
Well, no. What he did was he found in his history older maps, and he put them together and said, hey, look, so somebody back then knew what was going on.
But there's a level of complexity to old maps. This one's before, earlier than this. It doesn't make any sense if you can't get a broader viewpoint of it. You know, like I've never understood it since I was a little kid. How is that possible?
I'm picturing a guy with like a notebook walking along the coast,
and that's how they did
and
it.
kind of just like tracing.
Well, they took the degrees from the sky.
Yeah,
So
I know
check
there's
it,
a more complex way.
so check it out. But what's great about this is there's no ice on this yet. He can see through the ice. So this.
How?
Well, again, it's a series of older maps that he put together. So somewhere, let's just say maybe it was sitting there at some time and it decided it wanted to just shift down to there. He took what was under that ice because he never saw it. He took what was existing, and now they know that it's there. It shifted downwards, and this is what it looked like.
What were they using? Abacuses? Like, what the hell were they using?
They were great navigators. I mean, if you look at all the old
compasses and stuff.
Well, no,
right?
I mean they charted the stars, so they would know to what degree this landmass stuck out into the ocean. And that's how they did it.
And didn't.
That's how they did it.
Well, and to add,
in the 1800s,
And now listen. And
they lived to be 20.
Atlantis was.
How they pass this on from one generation to the next?
I don't get it.
And that's where our arrogance comes from. That we are the generation. There were people before us, and they plotted and mapped, and they knew this stuff.
Well,
before
and I
we
guess
did.
that's what we're like kind of like in like hinting towards with all this too, right, Fred? Is that like basically if we're going on the assumption that potentially there were other civilizations that had reached the technological peak that we are at and perhaps farther. But I think for me personally anyway, it's just really hard to wrap my head around the idea that like, you know, I'm looking at my smartphone and I've got computers and all that stuff. I'm like, well, how advanced, like I feel like maybe we're more advanced, but then who knows? Like, I don't know. I mean, all of the technology that we currently possess evolved from elements that existed on Earth as long as the Earth has existed.
We're going in the same direction as our ancestors who obliterated themselves are going
numerous times. They had to
times.
restart again, right?
And there's no trace. What did I say on the last one? Like 400,000 years. What's the name of that theory? That every 400,000 years there wouldn't be anything left of the previous.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean.
Because
it would all over again.
So check it out. So look, you write on your cell phone. You write your emails. Mm-hmm. How much do you actually sit down and physically write?
I do a lot.
Say your our kids are all dependent.
No, cursive is
where
not
we used to
a thing
sit down
anymore.
and read a book, which was paper, which disappears. You know, let's just say something wipes out our electronics. What are we going to do? And what are the kids 3 generations now who can't write other than get on a cell phone or a computer? Yeah. What are they going to? They're going to have to start over. Well,
see, I think the only thing that gets me about this possible theory is that you were talking about on the break, like things decomposing and like the environments for that. I feel like where we exist now in this space and technology, that all of the things that we have, like the physical objects we have, they wouldn't decompose, and so there wouldn't be any way, like the materials that we're currently using wouldn't. Supposedly they don't decompose.
400,000 years, there's not going to be nothing left.
People think that's why the ancients built in stone, because they knew that was the one thing that would.
That's the only thing. I was just going to say that's the only thing that would still remain, and that's why you have under Baalbek giant megalithic sites. Why you have under the Krug, they've all been built on the same place because the foundation, the groundwork was already laid.
So is then the idea that plastics don't decompose incorrect?
Well, they will, but maybe we're the only idiots that made dumb enough to use plastic.
So much of it.
Right. 2 quick things that you guys brought up. Eric, you had mentioned, how did we know to map it? Fred had mentioned ancient Indian texts. In a lot of these texts, there are very accurate descriptions of people getting in crafts and lifting up.
Vimanas.
Not in the Vimanas, and then in one of the descriptions, it sounds exactly like what an astronaut would see if he was taking off in a rocket. They basically describe, I think it was a Chinese text, described their leader getting into a ship, and he went up and he said the sky turned from blue to black. They could see the land starting to curve, and he said he got so high that the oceans themselves looked like tiny puddles. And this is right in ancient texts from thousands of
Yeah,
years
how
ago.
would he know that?
Isn't that
Right.
in Enoch where they talk about it looks like porridge or something like that? The land?
Yes, that is in Enoch.
But back to the map thing, because this is like, is there like a study of the history of map making? Because I would love for a scholar
Yeah.
to explain to me how they could actually do that.
I'm going to say that should
in
be your next
primitive
guest, Eric.
times.
You got to find yourself
Right.
a map maker.
Well, that's what James was
You know,
getting to.
yeah, I think I'm gonna do that.
you should, because they have to be around, right? I mean, that's a whole freaking...
Old stories like James was getting to talk about these leaders going up and seeing, and what you want to do is write down what you see. And again, these are old maps brought together to make a new
Right.
map, and because that's what they had. This is what these cats.
So
had.
every
That's their
generation it built.
technology.
What you're saying is it built on, and hopefully became more refined and more accurate.
And plus, too, the quick answer to that is you have to divide it into latitude versus longitude. Latitude has been much easier for thousands of years. You just measure the height of the North Star, boom, you've got your latitude, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. Longitude is trickier. In fact, in the 1700s, they actually had a contest on who could create the best piece of equipment that was small, portable, but it was heavy duty, that could actually record longitude from a ship, because the way they had to do it was tricky. I could explain it, but it was with the position of the sun. And so it made commercial shipping really slow way down because they couldn't figure out how to calculate it.
What was the name of that device?
It was a sextant.
Sextant.
Yeah, a sextant's used. Then a chronometer is also used.
Okay.
So what I explain to students, what I explain to them, that's a quick story, but time zones are a modern invention. Time zones were invented because of railroad travel, actually, when it
Absolutely.
became intercontinental.
And that's a cool story.
Yeah. So basically, if you eliminate time zones,
Or standardizing a time period.
Yes.
Was because trains were like wrecking into, because things were kind of like fluid at one point, right? Because
Yes.
my
There were
8
local
o'clock
time-
wasn't really your 8 o'clock, but
Yeah.
we kind of met there, and it worked for society, except when it
Kinda
came
like me
to rail travel, right?
Right. So
See,
basically,
if I took a train here, I'd be on time. But
There's no hope, Fred.
all right. Well, let's just move on real quick then. So, did other groups before us know that Antarctica was actually Atlantis? Some people think the Nazis knew this. So they called this area
Them
Neuschwabenland.
fuckers.
Ever since the early 30s, they were actually sending scientific expeditions down there to map it. And some people thought this was going to be the new Germany. And so there were legends that at the end of World War II, this is where the anti-gravity disc technology wound up that they had actually developed. And it's also why about 250,000 Nazis went missing at the tail end of World War II. So the legend is, as the Allies were trying their best to round up the remaining Nazis, because we had something, it's kind of creepy, but a cool name, it's called the Black Fleet. Even after Germany surrendered, something like 40-some U-boat captains are like, no, we are not going to surrender. We are going to continue to fight on. And so some of these U-boats were intercepted heading to Antarctica, and they allegedly carried red mercury. That is an isotope of mercury that the legend says...
There's a comic book about that whole thing.
Is there?
Who's the superhero that's all deformed red something? Oh, God. They made a movie about him.
Deadpool,
No. Go back a decade.
the Red Lantern.
No. Yeah, it'll come to me. But that whole story is about in the Antarctica, they had the red mercury, and that's a
Oh, no,
thing.
no, check that out.
Yeah.
So officially red mercury does not exist. If it does, nobody's sure why it's called red. Some people think it was called red because the Soviets gave them to them. Others think that if you mix something with it, that made it red. Now, interestingly, let me see if I have the slide. No, I don't.
Hellboy.
Hellboy. The beginning of Hellboy is really good.
That's what
Yeah.
that's about.
With like the robot Nazi, terrifying. So Samuel T. Cohen, the father of the neutron bomb, said red mercury was real. He said they basically took radioactive waste, mixed it with actual mercury, and then could rotate it really fast and get these anti-gravity properties. So what you see here on the left is definitely at least a real blueprint. These were the Haunebu. These were the flying anti-gravity discs the Germans were developing. We probably talked about them. And curiously, you all probably know, a lot of Nazi scientists and engineers and media propaganda people, and were actually imported here through Operation Paperclip. So interestingly, that all happens in 45. By 47, you've got the Roswell crash and other UFO crashes. Was it really aliens? I think it probably was. Or was it just us crashing this anti-gravity technology? At the lower right, you have the rumored Bell, which was either a Haunebu, Die Glocke, or maybe a time machine that they were working on. So here's where the Nazi legend gets a little bit more oomph behind it. And Fred, if we do that holes in the poles presentation in the future we talk about, this is where it would get into. What you see here was the largest military exercise post-World War II. It might still be in history. This was called Operation High Jump. It involved almost 4,000 men. You can see 13 ships, 33 aircraft, and it was led by Rear Admiral Richard Byrd. So officially, this was a scientific mapping expedition. And if you look up the official story of High Jump to Antarctica, a handful of men died, but that was all with airplane crashes or machinery malfunctions. Unofficially, the story emerged, this was an assault on Antarctica to eliminate the final pockets of Nazis. But they were in for a surprise. As they got close to the mainland, anti-gravity discs came up from beneath the ice and started to just totally shred the armada with beam technology. And so Byrd and his men had to retreat very quickly. Now, this is a huge sin in PowerPoint to put this much text on a slide, but let me at least give you the gist. I've highlighted the key parts. When Byrd got back from his expedition, he was interviewed by the U.S. media, and he was very much a changed man. And he only died a couple years after this, some say mysteriously. But he was in somewhat of a panic, and he warned the U.S. media that even though World War II was over, the United States now faced a possibility of invasion of hostile planes coming from the polar regions. He said we could be attacked from one or both poles. And then at the bottom, he basically said the time of isolationism is no more. I have to warn my compatriots, the time has ended when we were able to take refuge in our isolation and rely on the certainty that the distances, oceans, and poles were a guarantee of safety. Certainly sounds like a man that saw something a lot more than a mapping.
So was he made
expert.
fun of by, mainstream science at that time?
They did cover this, and I want to make sure I'm not conflating my Richard Byrd and James Forrestal stories, because he was the former Secretary of Defense who was institutionalized. But Byrd did actually go back to Antarctica one other time after this, but did have some personal life struggles and then died, I would say, less than 10 years after this. Some people say natural causes. Some people say he got a little bit too close to disclosing what was actually down here.
Isn't this guy like associated with the flat earther thing too?
In some ways, he is also he's one of the few people in history that has traveled to both poles, Antarctica and the Arctic.
He was celebrated as an explorer, as a
yes,
the treks of Admiral Byrd.
Yes.
Is that right?
And the crazy thing that I want to impress about Antarctica, it's way, way different than the Arctic. So understand, up at the top of the Arctic, no actual landmass beyond Greenland, just ice.
It's just ice. Yeah.
It's just
water,
ice.
yeah.
But what's extra crazy about Antarctica, people don't know, this Antarctica is over 10,000 feet high. So think about the highest peaks in the United States. Antarctica, the entire continent is that high. So anybody who's actually been to the South Pole.
That's why they can't breathe down there. They all have respirators on, right?
Because imagine basically climbing a peak in Colorado, but now having to do that off a couple hundred kilometers in a straight line without any supplies to get you there. That's why Antarctica is totally
the oxygen
insane.
is thin for humans.
Very, very thin. So these are real pictures from Antarctica.
Okay.
Some say they are pyramid-shaped mountains. Some say no, these are actual pyramids. So recently, with temperatures rising and some ice melting off of Antarctica, it's exposing some of these things. Now, I do have a quick 3-minute clip from Ancient Aliens that ties some of this together. But Eric, it's your podcast. Are we allowed to show that or no?
Yeah, I'll show
All
it.
right, let's take a quick break then.
Let's give credit to Ancient Aliens and then
Let's do it. Ancient Aliens
Ancient
is
Aliens.
amazing. I love
Ancient
it.
Aliens.
Let's check out how they relate Atlantis and Antarctica with the narration of the brilliant Robert Clotworthy.
The Bible's book of Genesis. In chapter 6, verse 9, begins the story of Noah and the flood, in which God sends a great deluge to rid the earth of sinners and stars.
It's better if you take off your headset to hear.
Different versions of this same story exist in nearly every ancient tradition around the world. Going back 5,000 years, we have sacred texts that tell us there was an antediluvian civilization.
That means before the flood.
There was a great flood and that there were survivors. The Mesopotamians speak of this in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Egyptians speak of this in the Edfu creation text. Plato learned from the Egyptians that there was once a civilization called Atlantis that existed 9,000 years before his time. Plato wrote about the lost continent of Atlantis in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, around 360 BC. Historians and researchers have long debated whether this pre-flood civilization was purely mythological or actually existed. Arguments have been made suggesting remnants of Plato's destroyed civilization could be found at the South Pole.
I think what happened in Antarctica was that approximately 13,000 years ago, that flourishing civilization that originally came from space and establishing its presence in Antarctica was flash frozen. We actually have ancient evidence of this in the form of Plato's dialogues, where he talks about the last days of Atlantis. That basically is informing us that Atlantis was an extraterrestrial colony that had established itself on Earth, and that after a pole shift, Atlantis was moved under the ice where the South Pole currently is.
As more and more pieces of the puzzle start to come together, might we soon be able to solve the mystery of the Antarctic continent? And if so, just what might we discover?
Modern whistleblowers still argue
I know Bill Burns. We're friends.
there is more about Antarctica that is being covered up than we think. There are entire bases down there, entire civilizations, that the world's governments are working with aliens. They know about the buried artifacts, they know about the ancient civilizations down there, and they know about the extraterrestrial civilizations that continue to operate in Antarctica at the very moment.
It's totally possible that Antarctica contains an extraterrestrial home base on Earth. It's a totally isolated part of the planet. It's completely uninhabited, or was until recently. It's ideal.
All right, so nice clip there from Ancient Aliens, just sort of succinctly summing it up. So what do we know about Antarctica in modern times? We've had a lot of U.S. government officials take trips there. Oops, sugar.
Sorry.
Including...
That was extra, like, sound.
Yeah, it was. It sounded pretty good. Including second man on the moon, Buzz Aldrin. Now, when Buzz was there in Antarctica, he had to be life flighted out because he had a heart attack. At the lower left, you can see the rumored Buzz Aldrin tweet. It says, "We are in danger. It is evil itself." And it shows a pyramid-shaped mountain. Now, I read all about this because Buzz is one of my favorite people in human space flight. I prefer him way more than Neil Armstrong. He's done a lot more to advocate for human space flight. On 3 different occasions, Buzz said they did not walk on the moon. It was a simulation, but more on that another time. But I read up on the tweet, and most people think it is actually a Photoshop job and was not a real Buzz tweet. Because if you're familiar with Twitter, the size of it does not look right. The spacing does not look right. But he was life flighted out of there with a heart attack. Now, all of these images are on Google Earth. It's up to you to decide what is real. I myself found this one on Google Earth, but I can tell you this one was not actually on the landscape. Google Earth had a feature where you could actually post your own photographs to Google Earth. And somebody had clipped this one onto the landscape a little bit north of Antarctica. It could be a Photoshop job. This one, though, was real. And I say was real because if you go to these coordinates now in the updated, most recent version of Google Earth, it's totally hidden in darkness. I just tried it about 2 months ago. You can no longer see the mouth of this massive cave. Other images have surfaced too. This was found in Antarctica. And understand, there are humans in Antarctica, but only at the edges. A couple scientific outposts. This was found, and some people think this object, whatever it was, crashed and basically made this gouge. And then they allege this was something, maybe a tank column, something that actually went out to inspect what was actually there. We also have, and there's a great Ancient Aliens episode about it, anomalies under the ice in Antarctica.
Wait, we did not do Antarctica, did we?
I don't think
on this
we
podcast.
did. I don't think we've
touched on it a few times.
But we haven't done it as a
comes up a lot,
show.
Yeah,
right?
we touch about high jump and stuff like that, but we never really got into it.
Do you have a presentation on it?
Well, Fred and I were talking. The next one I want to make from scratch because these things take me like weeks and weeks to do. But holes in the poles, and we can talk all about it.
Cool.
But even for the military, there are no-fly zones. There are areas that the military cannot fly over. There have been stories that have come out on the History Channel.
Why?
Not only are there massive magnetic anomalies, but they're basically told you don't fly over that area. There was one time where a scientist had to be airlifted out of one of these stations. It was
for cancer, right?
Appendicitis?
I think it wasn't like a long-term thing like cancer.
It was a medical emergency.
It was a medical emergency. So a military crew had to fly to get him, and they decided we're not going to fly on this trajectory around the periphery. We're going to go right through this no-fly zone because we've got to get this guy back alive. They did. Their compasses went crazy. They got the scientist. They saved his life, but then they got totally ripped down one side and up the other because they flew through this no-fly area. There are big areas that are geothermically hot. That there is a lake down there, I think it's called Lake Baikal, where it's liquid water, it's really, really warm, and that is also a no-fly area there. So we do have one last...
Why?
Yeah, right? That the military basically declares these areas. There have been a number of UFO sightings over
For
some
national
of these areas.
security?
Yes, and not even the military is allowed to go over them. So I would say definitely more than a scientific outpost. So if you like what you heard, maybe the next time, if I'm lucky enough to be back, there is another possibility for Atlantis. Does it lurk, dun, 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 in the Bermuda Triangle?
Oh, man, yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Good segue. Or good foreshadowing, rather, that would be. Yeah.
Foretold by the psychic Edgar Casey.
Who was pretty damn accurate.
So was Nostradamus.
Dun, dun, dun.
But the psychics, I mean, we always hear about their correct things. So what other kind of stuff have they talked about that didn't happen?
And you have to be careful because with Nostradamus, not so much Casey, Nostradamus in particular, people have altered a lot of his
built on the
predictions.
legend. Yeah.
Like, for example, back when September 11th happened, people were like, oh my gosh, Nostradamus called this. And they showed this quote of, in the new city, 2 twin brothers will fall. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's insane. But then you look back, Nostradamus didn't say that. Somebody actually tweaked the quote. And I've got more on that in my presentation on time travel.
So we've got like our next 3 shows
This
planned.
was excellent. Excellent work, James.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this
You
was
guys
cool.
are great.
No, this was a good one. I really enjoyed
Do we want to
this.
talk about Atlantis now?
Yeah.
Yeah, we went like all around the world and back. But no, this is so cool though, because I feel like it really like sets the stage for how something like this could even have become such a, like you said, like kind of like part of the zeitgeist for humanity. Like we've talked about like this lost city and how it's almost been like in some ways like a reoccurring story.
Yes, I like that reoccurring story. And I mentioned the word dovetail so much, but it just fits in so nicely with so many other ancient legends we have. And they all point to that same time period of 10,000 BC. That can't all be coincidence.
We can guess that probably back then there was a lot of alien contact that came in. You can argue that, from this period, we have the floods. We also have the Ice Age that was coming in. Mm-hmm. You sit around and we talk about, Atlantis, it could have possibly been a ship. There could have been possibly a number of ships that came down from Mount Olympus to the gods, that went up to the north, to the Viking settlements up there. At this time period in history, we have all these things. We have what's the one in Turkey, James?
Mohenjo-daro.
Yep, that was buried.
No. It's on the tip of my brain.
I know mine.
Göbekli Tepe.
Yep. So we have all these ancient sites that exist this time of when Atlantis was supposed to be there, and Atlantis disappeared, but Göbekli Tepe was buried. And at that period of time in the Asian Minor, those cats, they have those vast underground cities where they dug. They were hiding from something above ground, and they didn't want their civilization to be found, so they buried Göbekli Tepe. And they've only found a percentage of it. So it's if you look in China, the buried the pyramids in China with things all the buried, it all comes from the same time period that Atlantis supposedly disappeared from the face of the earth. So somebody was wiping out things. And even in India, look at the stories that they talk about in India about gods fighting with their laser weapons and their thunder weapons and their what probably came down to be really was atomic weapons. All this takes place in the same time that Atlantis supposedly disappeared from the water. So either Atlantis took off or Atlantis got sunk like so many other places. But, again, ancient civilizations back there had the technology. We just don't want to acknowledge it.
And one thing I wanted that we didn't quite cover, but Eric alluded to it when he was talking about mapping, like how did humans figure all this out? We have to be careful because we don't want to undercut our own species. Some people get very frustrated with the ancient aliens hypothesis because they say you're basically undercutting the ability of humans. But part of the reason our history is so muddled and difficult to totally comprehend is we are trying to look at it linearly, and we're trying to think humans have all evolved in this way. The problem is, if we have other civilizations popping in at different times to seed things, that can throw everything out of whack. Like Eric, you mentioned, how did they know about the whole Earth? Not just the Earth, but one thing that you always see in ancient structures all over the Earth, petroglyphs, geoglyphs, is you see the spiral shape. The spiral comes up over and over and over again.
Nautilus.
Yeah. And some people think, well, that was a depiction of time. Like the Maya thought time was cyclical and repeating. But others have asked, what if that is how our Milky Way looks like from the outside? What if civilizations were coming here, showing us our place in the cosmos? Our ancestors, all they could do to make sense of it was to try to record it. Or even human evolution. Like, if you really believe in evolution exactly as it's stated, how in the world did human beings lose all their hair at 10,000 BC when glaciers were at their peak? If natural selection is the only governing mechanism, only the hairy humans should have survived. So what we actually see...
Proof.
So what we actually see, and even anthropologists acknowledge this, is with our species, there have been 3 different jumps. There have been 3 times that humans were at a very low level, and then all of a sudden there was a jump and we were at a higher level. So we're basic hunter-gatherers just trying to survive. Then all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, we've got writing, we've got cities, we've got civilization. The brain capacity, even earlier, is really, really low. All of a sudden, in a jump, brain capacity just really, really jumps. So long story short, I got Göbekli Tepe up there because Fred mentioned it, but part of the problem is too many mainstream archaeologists are trying to decipher all of this totally linearly, whereas I just don't think that you can. And even some mainstream scientists have come around. About 2 years ago, it came out, a group of scientists made headlines. They said the octopus had to come from outer space. They said when you
hearing about that.
when you look at the DNA of an octopus, they said it is unlike anything else that is anywhere here on the earth.
What was the one that escaped that literally watched the security guards for so long and then was able to time out when there was going to be a break in security? It escaped from the tank. It went and...
Wasn't that from Finding Dory? I think that was Finding Dory.
No, this actually happened. No, you just made... No. This happened. It happened.
We all believe you.
Yeah, whatever.
How about this?
I'm gonna freaking find an article.
Well,
I'm
how
gonna
about this
bring
little
back.
weird thing? It's in the same vein.
It probably was.
Yeah, it's probably out of a cartoon from Disney, but I mean, Disney predicts everything, don't they?
Simpsons did.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how in nature everything is curved? There's no right angles naturally made, from the dimensions of planets, dimensions of galaxies, dimensions of anything you see. A right angle or something similar, even similar to a right angle, is man-made. Everything has a curvature to it. Like the natural earth creates things that are curved.
From the biggest things to the infinite smallest things to an atom, they follow the same pattern.
No doubt.
Something revolves around something else, and it's a sphere. Flat earthers.
Yeah.
And if you look at, from the bottom to the top. So if you want to get into Fred's theory of time, time is only relevant to the space that you're in. So and we talked about this, somebody else has this, but this is something I always thought when I was a kid. And when you said that, I noticed as a kid, the model was there for everything was a sphere. So you have the atoms that revolve around it, but they're always depicted as a sphere.
Right.
So in those atoms that make up the nucleus and the protons, there's a sphere in there that make a bunch of them that make it up.
When they keep breaking it down further, it's
so
still
infinite.
round.
But that moment of time and that small little thing is a lifetime for them.
Well, they're
As you get bigger-
experiencing time differently.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a lifetime for them. So as you get bigger, time changes.
Like a gnat.
But it's always the same model, and it's always the same concept of time. Their lifetime is smaller because they're smaller. What if we're part of something bigger? We're an atom in something bigger, and our lifetime is, what we call it, 70, 80 years, whatever.
What if we are a piece of space dust right now that is just waiting to be shoved into the trash can?
That's what it is.
By huge beings that are just,
well, we're part of something else. And just as our germs are part of us, our molecules, there's whole universes there, and that's going bigger.
And that leads me to believe,
and they all have their own Atlantis.
That leads me to believe that no matter how many devices and more detailed devices, such as the Hadron Collider, we keep making and we keep drilling down and drilling down and drilling down, that we're never going to find the God part, that root thing that the spark. It's never going to be found because they think. The Higgs boson, I believe, the whole concept of that is a prime example. They're breaking that down now. They broke multiple times. They've broken it down. That wasn't the end point, like some initially suspected it might have been. It's just not, and they're never going to be able to find the actual particle. That's my belief. It's just not going to be able to be discovered.
When we get smart enough to use wireless energy and get rid of nukes and shit like that.
I'm pro nuke, man.
That's when the gods come back and they say, "Okay, now you're civilized. Let's show you the rest of the world. Let's show you the rest of the universe."
But isn't it fascinating that nuclear is a fear trigger because of bombs and nuclear accidents, but that in reality it's just another form of science that, if used correctly, would solve our fossil fuel issue in this world, but we choose to be afraid of it.
Well, there's a reason for that. You can't.
Well, it's called mankind.
Yep, it's called greed. And the ancients, if you want to get back to Atlantis, and we talk about the pyramids and shit like that, they all had a electrical
power source.
Power, yeah. Supposedly, everything was an electrical grid, and you can see those in the what they don't want us down there. If you want to get down and talk about Antarctica being Atlantis, they would have used this worldwide power grid that the ancient people who
they tried to plot that out by connecting monuments
and that's what
throughout the earth, right?
So you have all those mountain ranges down there, and they would have had it. Now it's flash frozen.
But that would have to be a level of intellect that's even far superior than where we are currently in our times.
But Nikola Tesla was at least heading that way.
And
that's what he was. Yeah, that's what he was building on Wardenclyffe in Long Island.
Because wireless energy.
Because what they had was they realized You need petroleum to help with the energy. You need coal. You know, if you're gonna wipe out all these industries that are making all these fat cats monies, and Tesla's like, you know what? The ancients had it. Let's throw this out there, and we could all do it for free. Mm-hmm. And when you have that,
destroy an industry,
and when you have that,
industry
able to go on and not, nobody's controlling you. You don't have to worry about. That's where your development comes from, and that's you have time to do other things. You don't have to sit around and worry about making money to pay your bills for your electric bill and shit like that and make somebody else rich. These cats back then, they were one with nature. And that's the truth of it. And they wiped themselves out.
So there was a different kind of technology.
Exactly.
Yes. And Julia mentioned this earlier. She had mentioned the cell phone. Like, well, I don't understand. Like, how could we have all this and not have that? One of the most fascinating UFO stories I ever read, and I'm not sure what book it was in, but it was a story where one had crashed, and inside for the electronics, they had found vacuum tubes. And I found the story fascinating because it basically alludes to the fact we could be really, really far ahead in electronic technology, but woefully behind in like anti-gravity technology. So when I think about civilizations, I think about different slider bars. And right now, like our slider bar for electronics and nuclear fission is way, way up. But our slider bars for like nuclear fusion, anti-gravity, spirituality is way, way down.
That's what I was just going to comment on is like when we talked about all those different like, segments of alien cultures that had come here. And there was the real tall ones.
Nordics?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. The ones that basically they were more advanced spiritually and like that they kind of like looked at us and were like, yeah, you guys got a way to go. Like, we'll come back later.
Yeah.
Processing nicely. Not finished.
Yeah, we'll let this one bake a little longer.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, James.
Thank you for having me back.
Excellent.
Yeah, this was really cool.
Thank you.
Fred was into this one, man.
He was locked in.
Yeah.
So we'll reconvene here soon. Fred's going to go out of town for a period of time. Come back. I guess we're going to reconvene in January.
Let's do it in January.
Maybe we're going to celebrate the holidays.
Yeah, we're going to celebrate the holidays through. We're going to try We're going to try to cram 6 people in here for a 6-person show. So next time you have some interaction with Mr. James over here, we're going to do it with a free-for-all show.
Free range.
It's a free-range podcasting as only the Eric McKenna Project can do. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you.
We are out.